honor is to actually introduce my friend, Rinaldo Brutoco, who has a mind that many of us wish we had. He thinks on a level that is just dynamic and amazing. And he was the one that wanted to have everyone have a conversation about how we're going to vote. I don't know about all of you, but I find it really difficult to read those very dry information exchanges about what the vote's about and what we're really doing, and then I get all freaked out and think, okay, I'm going to go to this group and see what they think. I really want to hear from the people who make the decisions, and tonight we're going to do that. So once again, I welcome all of you. I thank the El Encanto for having us, and I'm excited that we now have something that is community-based to talk about how you are going to vote. So please first invite up my dear friend, Rinaldo Brutoco, to tell you a little more about tonight.
So first of all, since we got cameras, we want to use them. Thank you, Jeff, for coming tonight. I would like to introduce our co-host, Rui. Please stand up, Rui. Rui is the divisional head of the Belmond chain, which includes all the hotels in Latin America, Central America, and the Caribbean, of which this is one. So because we're North America, we're in Rui's territory. Thank you, Rui. Thank you for hosting us. And thank you to Franco. So this is a place where we have a neutral conversation. So we're not recruiting for the academy. We're just trying to basically think globally and act locally. With that in mind, I bring up tonight's topic. So tonight's topic emerged because I was approached by several people over the confusion of measures G and H. Now, on our television screens, we are seeing lots of commercials for G and H. And what we think is that those commercials have to do with a bunch of oil issues, which in San Luis Obispo is true, but is it true for us? So on your ballot in Santa Barbara County, and this is a very dry point. I'm delighted that you've showed up because this is probably the driest topic we're ever going to deal with. But it's so important because it's basic to democracy. It's the basic, it's not the driest. Oh, good, okay. I've already got it. We've got an argument going already. This is great. I wanted to do this meeting because I was asked, like, where do you stand on G&H? And the person asked me the question was asking about oil. And I said, well, that's not our, G&H here means how do you want to redistrict? Do you want the solution that came out of one group of people, or do you want the solution that came out of another? And so there's these two competing initiatives on our ballot, G and H. They're mutually exclusive. And Das, I believe, was the author of one of them, right? You're the proponent. And Robert was the author of the contrary position. So I thought the best thing we could do is put this on tape. Normally, our tapes last longer, but this one's only going to have currency for the next couple of weeks, because when we vote, this issue will be behind us. So we were asked to do something that would help people understand what is that issue. I have one request. Please tell your friends to come watch this video on our website. It'll be available in a couple of days, so they can be beneficiaries of the conversation you're about to hear. Because I think the people we've got on the panel are really, really the right people to help us understand this issue and get to some understanding of where we would like to vote and how we'd like it to come out. So with that in mind, I'd like to introduce the panel. On your seats, we've left a little flyer so you can identify the players with the scorecard. To my right is Das Williams. Das is the Santa Barbara County 1st District Supervisor, so you're sitting in his district, be nice to him. He also is the supervisor for Montecito, which has put a lot of burdens on him in the last year or so. And thank you, Das, for what you've had to do for that part of our community. Next to Das is Robert Collector, who's the co-author and advocate for Measure H. So Das helped to draft G, Robert drafted H, or helped to draft H. Next to Robert is Mary Rose. Mary Rose is a full-service public relations service. Most of us in the room know Mary extremely well, and someone who's been an activist on numerous political issues and numerous campaigns, and who generously offered to come tonight to express her view on these issues. And then last but not least is Daniel Montello, who I didn't get a chance to meet on the way in because we stalled Daniel for you. We dragged this so that you could get here. I want you to know, we didn't want you to miss anything so you could take shots at us, and so you've already taken one. Welcome, come to the club. Anyway, so Daniel is a professor at University of California, Santa Barbara, and is a proponent of H, and he's a professor of psychology and brain sciences. He has authored or co-authored 100 articles, which I'm really envious of because that's more than I've done. And he's edited 6 books. He's basically a great academic who co-edits the academic journal Spatial Cognition and Computation. And along with his doctoral student, Daniel Phillips, he pursues a professional interest in political geography. And that interest in political geography, I think, no? Yes. Yeah, that's how we got it. Good, okay, got it. So with that, what I'm going to ask the group to do, I'm going to ask Doss to go, here's the format. Doss is going to go first. I'm going to ask the panelists to keep their comments to 5 to 7 minutes each. At the end of their comments, all of the comments, all 4, then we're going to do a little back and forth with the panel, and then we want questions and answers from the audience, and that'll take us to the finish line. So without further ado, thank you very much for coming, and thank you for your attention. And Doss Williams, would you please take the mic?
Well, first of all, I want to thank you for your work in energy and on local business, 2 vital topics. Hello, my name is Doss Williams. I'm a county supervisor, and I'm here to ask you to vote yes on Measure G and either vote no or don't vote on Measure H. And it's not because the one ballot measure is, or one advocates and the ideas behind one advocates is right and the other wrong, but mainly this is an example of how much better the public process works when you can amend and change something in a legislative action. Measure H was put forward by collection of signatures, and as such, the Board of Supervisors had the ability only to place that on the ballot. We could not amend the language thereof. And because I think independent redistricting is a good subject, and Mr. Collector and company brought up an important subject. Now, I probably would have handled it a year or 2 from now and not this year. We put forward Measure G. And Measure G is, I would say, has a stronger consensus in the community. It is supported by the Sierra Club. It's also supported by the Republican Party and the Democratic Party locally. It's supported by the League of Women Voters, both of Santa Barbara County and of Santa Barbara and of Santa Maria, so both north and south. And so the support of both good government groups, environmental groups, I think, and conservatives and liberals says a lot about the drafting of Measure G. There was definitely debates at the board about it. I accepted amendments, even though I already had the 3 votes necessary to place it on the ballot. I took amendments from the conservatives on the Board of Supervisors, and as such, I think it has the credibility to establish a truly independent redistricting commission that is, and this is important, representative of the community at large. I think one of the improvements that our ballot measure has over H is that it is required. The first 5 are basically chosen similarly to how Measure H chooses the members of the commission. But the second 6 on the commission are chosen by the 5, but have to balance out the commission demographically. We are a diverse county. There needs to be some mechanism for the picking of a commission that is actually representative of the diversity in this county, and representative of such things as partisanship, race, age, diversity in this county. And I also think it's probably the one way to make whatever move that we do as a county survive any court challenge. The idea that we could have a redistricting commission that is not representative of the community, I think probably has some problems that go beyond the political. I think the other reason why it's important to support Measure G is the level of public process that will take place after its passage. There are 7 public meetings and then 7 hearings done on the preparation of the map and the demographics around it. That is important. Something as important as the first time that our county has a independent redistricting process is something that deserves that much attention and that much public scrutiny. And I think I want to end on what we have in common. I think not only do Mr. Collector and I, probably in the minority here, believe that independent redistricting commissions is a very sexy subject and not a boring subject at all. But I think it's also an example of maybe that I'm sure the reason why the liberal supervisors on the board were not brought into the conversation about Measure H was simply because they probably thought we would think it was a terrible idea. But the reality is it is an emerging bipartisan consensus in this state and hopefully eventually in this country behind the idea that legislators should not choose their constituents. Constituents should choose their legislators. And it's just an inherent conflict of interest. Just look at North Carolina and Georgia to have legislators choosing their constituencies. And hopefully that spirit of bipartisan reform will catch on nationwide, not just here in the county of Santa Barbara. So vote yes on Measure G.
Thank you, Dobbs. Robert, can I ask you this? The videographer said it works better if you stand at that mic.
You got to sit.
Well, if you want to sit, you sit. Whatever. I'm not going to admit.
This is the county, so. All right, should I better?
I think it works better, he said. Is that right, Jeff? Jeff is giving me thumbs up, so that means I'm right.
I'll do this.
You'll look better.
I'll do it then.
And you can do the Jesus pose if you want.
I'll do this. Now, okay. Target, all right. I'm Robert Collector. I have been a dad and a co-chair and a civic activist for about 25 years coming from Los Angeles. I've been on 2 public school boards. I've been in leadership in Montecito at the Montecito Association for well over a decade. I was twice chair of land use. I was president. I've been on numerous nonprofit boards. I hope to be someone my kids could use as an example about their job as citizens in carrying water. You don't complain if you don't do it. And for 20 years here more, I've done it. And I founded with 2 of my partners, one of whom, Dennis Patrick, is sitting there, a former chairman of the FCC. Reason in Government, it's because 3 of us, Dennis and Brian Gable and I, have spent a whole lot of years together doing public service, me local, them more national. But we, all of us shared a great love of community, a great love of country, and really felt that there was a huge number of centrist people who were being left behind because of the tribal politics on the left and the right. We thought, what could we do in our community to make a difference? And the 3 of us had a consensus that anti-gerrymandering was a place for us to go. I agree with Dots on everything that he said in his last remarks. It's gerrymandering is a disgrace. I'm a Virginia boy. I went to the University of Virginia. I grew up in Mr. Jefferson's territory. When I was in public school, my field trips were all to the founders' houses. It is very dear to me. And I think that drawing lines to benefit incumbents is an abomination. My group and I felt that in 28, when an initiative was passed in the state supported by progressive causes, it was anti-gerrymandering. This was something that we thought crossed from left to right. It was good governance. It was what the founders wanted. It was citizens, not politics and not money, choosing their own governance. And we chose, there was legislation, there was another initiative in 12, there was legislation in 16 that Doss and Hannah Beth and the local Democratic Party supported. So when we decided to do this, we thought it was something that the community would benefit from, and we wanted to be the first county in California to do it. It was not an attempt to surprise anybody. We went out and we got 16,600 signatures. I saw signature gatherers one day at Trader Joe's. There were a bunch of people saying, well, what is that? And the person said anti-gerrymandering, and everybody said, I'm in. And I thought, my God, 2 words, and they get it. When I was a kid, I worked on Madison Avenue in advertising, and I know how powerful it is if you can reduce your product to 2 words. It took us about a year to make this happen. And then when our signatures were certificated, I got an email. It said they were certificated and you should show up at the Board of Supervisors on Tuesday. So we didn't have any chance to tell anybody, to do anything. We were operating in real time, and then I discovered that the county had ginned up their own. There is a profound difference between G and H. And it's a difference, in my opinion and my colleagues' opinion, about the DNA of this. Our DNA is that this comes from citizens. There is no quid pro quo. We don't accept $20,000 from firemen to support this because guess what? The firemen are going to get something in return. There is nothing. We are like Caesar's wife, above reproach. And that's what we wanted to do. We are 3 dads, 3 coaches, 3 citizens, 3 people. That's it. Our provisions are less than theirs. All the language must come from existing language in legally binding provisions. So we have a Sacramento law firm. There was something in the independent. There's always something ugly in the independent, claiming we don't know where that language came from, please. Our language had to be vetted by county council. Mr. Williams, whom I greatly admire, says that having county administer this is better for you. Well, I think we profoundly disagree. Mr. Williams' Measure G has all sorts of provisions about who should be on it. The county administers who should be on it. Who administers them? It's the county, after all. And with all these identity politics provisions, what happens is we're afraid is that the choice of people on the commission becomes subjective and not objective. Ours is very simple. There are no elected officials that have anything to do with it. It's 5 people. Someone said to me when I was interviewed by the Sierra Club, well, theirs has 11 and yours only has 5. And I said, well, for decades and decades, 5 supervisors did it. You didn't have a problem with that. 5 supervisors who didn't have to pass any litmus test did it, and you were happy with that. 5 can do it. And Dan will talk, I think, about why the metrics allow 5 citizens can do it. It's very clear. If you take politics out of it, it's very clear. And so ours, in our DNA, Mr. Williams, when he first drafted it, said that the complement of the committee ought to match the complement of Ds and Rs in our county, which is 2 Ds to 1 R. Now, we're not Rs. We're nothing. But we thought, if that's how you go into this, that's not the intent of this. So I think it's up to you. This is not anything that we need county to do. I feel strongly, and I know I probably talk too much, but we feel that our county is in a desperate place. And we feel that there need to be changes, and we feel that citizens can make these changes and ought to be able to make these changes. They're natural, it's clear, it can be done, and all of the other stuff is irrelevant. I think it's about whether or not you believe in your fellow citizens to do this, or you feel that the folks who, in my opinion, and I'm going to go off script, this is not Dennis, this is not Brian, this is me. I think the people who put us in this pickle shouldn't be the one who adjudicate how we escape it. Thank you.
Next, I'm going to ask Mary Rose to come up, but before we do, a show of hands, just as I'm curious, how many of you know what he just referred to in DOS in terms of the difference between G and H? Does everybody know what the distinction is between G and H, or should we spell that out?
You need to spell it out.
Okay, yeah, I thought so. Okay, so what is the essence of G and H is, from the perspective of Bob and as he spoke, the citizens of this county, certain citizens, took it upon themselves to suggest a way for redistricting to occur. And redistricting must occur. The question is, who's going to do the picking of the district lines? Is that a fair statement, Bob?
Yes.
Okay. And then the issue from the county's point of view is the county said, we think this is the way you ought to pick the district lines. And they have their own logic, which you've heard partially from DOS, and you'll hear more in a moment from Mary Rose. So what this is about is we are going to redistrict. That's not on the table. There are two methodologies that are being suggested. One is a 5-person methodology of citizens. One is an 11-person methodology, which picks 5 and then appoints the rest of the other 6. So the point I want to make here tonight is, don't get confused necessarily by the arithmetic. What's here is conceptually different, okay? And that conceptual difference, hold your question, we're going to get to questions. The conceptual difference is what we're trying to bring out tonight, okay? So if anybody has that thought as a question about how this fits together, the 5 and the 11, we're going to do questions for most of the evening in a second, but you wanted to, Jack?
What would help me is, under G, who appoints, who makes the appointments?
Okay.
Because that's so fundamental, and under H, so it seems like a fundamental difference. Who makes those appointments?
Yeah, I think that the fundamental difference is who makes the appointments and whether or not there is historical lock-in to district lines. I think that's what's going on here. So, so with that, and by the way, I don't mean to imply that one side is right or the other. I'm just saying that seems to be what's the question. So with that clarification, thank you very much. Mary Rose. If you don't know Mary Rose, she's one of the community treasurers. I just got to say that.
Thank you. Pull it down. That about right? Okay. I think actually it might be good to start actually by answering that question. What are the differences? And Measure H establishes a commission of 5 members who are drawn at random. And let me find my note just because there is I'm not positive I have it, but the limit is that you cannot have been, there's certain things in the state law that say you can't serve on an independent redistricting commission. They went beyond that to include ex-spouses, which I thought was very interesting. If your spouse is a contributor or involved in a campaign, you can't be involved on the commission. But if you're ex-spouse for 8 years, that was a strange one to me, just personally it was. It is a random drawing. There are limits of who can serve, but their ordinance is actually, their initiative is silent on who actually does that screening. So it's kind of if you submit your name, you can be in it. And then they draw randomly one from each supervisorial district. and then an alternate from that supervisorial district who must be a member of the same political party. So that's where you get into some of the question of exactly what is going on. I'm seeing some heads shaking, but that's my read of that initiative. For Measure G has a process where it's the registrar of voters who is an independent person who would screen people who apply for the commission to make sure that they don't have a political background that would be excluded by the state law, and this is very much in line with the rules that are in effect for the state commission, and for Los Angeles County and San Diego have independent redistricting commissions. And Measure G was modeled after those commissions in terms of how they were set up. And the first 5 are random draw, 1 from each supervisorial district. And then that group of people gets together and interviews the rest of the people who've applied to make sure that you have an appropriate cross-section of the community so that you don't have all, that it mirrors the makeup of the community. So this north and south, and the eastern part of the county is also represented, that age and occupation and economic diversity, and it's designed also very specifically that it reflects the political makeup of the county, and that gives a much higher weight to the nonpartisan or the no party preference voters as well. Measure G actually puts the minor party people sort of into that same pool for being able to draw from. So it seemed to be more representative and, again, a larger pool of voters that you can get to. So did that kind of answer kind of the 2 breakouts of one's 5, one's 11, and a more diverse?
I gave you the context to understand all the other comments. Thanks.
Right. Okay. So, having started out with that, I think a group of people, when Mr. Collector and his group got together and created Measure H, what became Measure H, what was really startling was they didn't really involve the community. And this is a problem, I think, that we have with a lot of initiatives that happen in the state and in the local electorate, that they tend to become a little bit inside baseball, for lack of a better term, and without that kind of objective reality of, gee, what does that mean? How does that happen? This has been such a problem in the state that the legislature actually changed. So California's a progressive state. We have the initiative, the referendum, and the recall. So, but now proponents of initiatives at a statewide level if they qualify their measures, can go to the legislature and negotiate changes once it's in place. That's not possible with a local initiative. It's a take it or leave it. The Board of Supervisors, as Supervisor Williams said, we had to put it on the ballot. They got the signatures. And that's really one of its problems, is it didn't have any public input. The League of Women Voters was very, very startled to see this measure come out. Mr. Collector says that it was founded by a diverse coalition of concerned residents from all parts of the county to prevent special interests from influencing a redistricting process, but nothing could really be further from the truth. Measure H, frankly, was designed and funded by special interests. Mr. Collector mentions a $20,000 contribution from the county firefighters. He failed to mention the $46,000 contribution from the California Petroleum Association that helped fund the $146,000 that they raised in order to pay those signature gatherers to go on the ballot. So their donor list is actually developers and North County interests. Very little of their funding. I think Mr. Collector is the lone donor from the South County.
I can't wait to respond.
96% of your contributions came from the North County. There was one other contribution, and he's aligned with the oil companies. League of Women Voters in Santa Barbara and Santa Maria have been outspoken proponents of independent redistricting commissions, but they have both taken the unprecedented step to write the ballot measure in opposition to Measure H. The League believes that any independent redistricting commission should be designed to produce a commission that is independent not only from the Board of Supervisors, but from political parties, campaign contributors, and other special financial interests, and it should be reasonably representative of the county's diversity. Measure H provides no assurances that the commission it proposes will be independent or reflective of the community. They have a fairly complex selection process which enhances the power of the two major political parties at the expense of the minor parties and no party preference voters. There are no specific requirements or skill set of analytics or understanding of the diversity of the county or in order to serve. You can just serve. I did find it, I'm sorry. The only qualifications are that you live in Santa Barbara County, be registered to vote, and state that their spouse, ex-spouse, in-laws, or children have not been involved in a donor to a political campaign in the last 8 years. Their measure goes much further than the state law, which says you can't be involved in a political campaign of the county board of in the county. Theirs also includes federal and state elections. And it also specifically eliminates you if you've worked for the county or for a labor union that's represented in the county for the past 8 years. And that removes a lot of our active, qualified, and recent retirees from service. And that's where we really get a lot of our pool of volunteers for a lot of things. Their measure goes very far in terms of eliminating some people, but it doesn't prohibit people with financial interests that come before the board from serving. We could have a commission, remember these are volunteers who throw their name into the hat to be drawn. It could become a commission of land use lawyers, developers, and oil company executives, as long as they have not contributed directly to the political campaigns. There's no way to screen them out, or who would screen them out. Measure H is flawed in that it requires only a simple majority to pass a redistricting measure, and with only 5 members on the committee. There's no definition in the measure of a quorum, so standard would be 3 members or a quorum. And then would 2 people be enough in order to redraw the boundary lines of the district? That's kind of a scary thought. There's no provision within their measure about how you would remove or replace somebody who wasn't serving. They do have an alternate. They have 5 members and they have 5 alternates, but there's no description within the ordinance as to when an alternate would serve. Is it only if the person resigns? Is it if they didn't show up for a meeting? How do you keep the consistency of that? And that's an issue with a lot of the boards and commissions that serve our county. People get appointed and they don't appear, so they need to be replaced, and there's no process that allows for them to be replaced under the Measure H. They don't require any skills, and again, I want to go back to the League of Women Voters, who are really one of the major proponents, both in California, which was a model with the State Redistricting Commission, and is now being used. That model is being used around the country. Redistricting commissions, truly independent redistricting commissions, are the wave of the future. They are going to replace politicians redrawing and selecting their own people. But Measure H is really not the way to do it. Measure G is a balanced approach. There was criticism that, it surprised you that Mr. Collector, that it came up at the board that there was another measure. That's because you hadn't talked to anybody in the whole political spectrum. So, I think I'm.
Do you know that?
You
No, you don't know that.
Let's put it this way, very few people had heard of your measure prior to it being passed. However, looking at your donor list, I'm sure you looked at a certain part of them. Thank you.
Thanks, Mary. As you can see, it's going to be getting really interesting in a few minutes. Thank you very much for staying tuned in. And now I want to introduce Dan Montello, who I have not had a pleasure to meet, but yet he comes up and he's got to be Italian with a name like that.
Hey.
So we're lunchmen. Good to meet you, Dan.
Good evening. Thank you for inviting me. I want to just clarify something. I'm a professor of geography at UC Santa Barbara since 1992. I am an affiliated professor in psychological and brain sciences, but my main job is in the Department of Geography. And among those 6 books I've co-authored or edited includes one of the main texts on human geography, in which I wrote the chapter on political geography, which doesn't mean I'm right, it just means I do know a little bit about the topic. I have a professional interest in political geography, especially redistricting, which is about the furthest thing from the most boring topic you've ever heard of, I guarantee you. Gerrymandering is unbelievably fascinating, and I'm not just saying that because I'm not selling anything here. Along with my doctoral student, Daniel W. Phillips, who's back there, we've been pursuing some of these topics. Redistricting and gerrymandering is amazingly critical as well as fascinating. That's part of the reason it's so interesting. Now, I was going to give a little bit of a talk about gerrymandering and so on, but I've decided to hold off on that because I have a feeling most of you pretty much understand the amazing power of given a landscape of residents who stay put. All you have to do is move the lines around and you can radically affect the outcomes of elections. It's an amazingly important thing in our county, our state, our country, as other people have said. Given my interests and the realization of how important the topic is, in 2010 I was interviewed in Sacramento for the statewide commission. I was definitely a proponent of the independent commission that was created at that time. I want to touch on my involvement with Reason in Government on this issue, the organization that Bob and his colleagues have. Mr. Collector contacted me last spring. I met with him, we talked about it, and I joined their effort. I did not design Proposition H, just to be clear. In my opinion, H should come before G because it came before G and stimulated G. I think both H and G would be an improvement over the current system. Make no mistake about it. Even under G, you just will not be able to pull off partisan gerrymandering the way that you potentially can given the current 3 of 5 supervisors. And by the way, I'm making no strong claims that terrific partisan gerrymandering has occurred, and I'm not saying it hasn't occurred. I'm not offering an opinion on that. I haven't studied it carefully. I know some arguments, either way, but I just say what could happen and what happens in lots of other places in the United States. Look, the key question to me, what is implied by the word independent in independent redistricting committee? If the main intent, if the spirit of this proposition is to avoid partisan gerrymandering to give an advantage to one party over the other, which I think is the spirit of any anti-gerrymandering rule like this, well, it seems to me that the commission should express the political balance between the views of Democrats and Republicans. It's that simple. That was the way the state commission was created. The party proportionality that's in Measure G, to a large extent, leaves the party in charge more or less still controlling the process, at least potentially. That is the crux of the issue, in my opinion. In other words, yes, we all agree that legislators should not select their constituents. I happen to believe that political parties should not select their constituents. It's that simple. Look again, I'm not claiming Measure H is perfect. I don't particularly like the number 5. I think 7's a better number. You know? But the language of Measure G that states selecting applicants so that the political party preferences of the members of the commission, as shown on the members' most recent affidavits of registration, shall be proportional as possible to the percentage of voters who are registered with each political party in the county of Santa Barbara. If you do the math, with an 11-person commission, I count 5 Democrats, 3 Republicans, and 3 NPPs. You see it that way, Doss?
That's
As far as that goes.
roughly the proportion of
Well, you
current
can't,
registration.
you can't use fractional people, so we'll round to that. I do note the next line in the current version, the one we're actually voting on, but wasn't in the original version of Measure G. However, the political party preferences of the commission members are not required to be exactly the same as the proportion of the political party preferences among the registered voters of the county. Now, I'm assuming that's a sentence you added to, compromise. Again, while it can't exactly mirror it because we're not having fractional people on the commission, but even if you say, well, that line in there means there'll be no guarantee that it'll be 5 to 3 to 3, it certainly allows it, and I would say it probably nurtures it. And to me, that's just not the spirit of what an independent commission is.
Thank you. Okay, thank you very much.
Bob, you had a couple of comments I think you wanted to make, so let me turn it over to you first, and then we'll move along.
There are several things, probably more than several things. I'm going to try to do this quickly. The comment that, my gosh, we didn't have any public comment. Theirs happened over the weekend. Where was that public comment? None. Secondly, I was able to raise money up north. There was a profound reason that there was no money attempted to be raised down south. I'm from Montecito. We had been through an enormous trauma. The last thing on earth I was going to do would be to go to those people and say, give me money. And friends of ours up north, because I worked on the steering committee of Measure M, which was the infrastructure initiative that went everywhere in the county except for the city, when the machine said it was a tax, but it wasn't. But nonetheless, my friends up north who I met on Measure M said, we understand about Montecito, and we're going to give you more so they don't have to. There's a story about that. The third story, and this actually annoys me. The other side always loves to look and see who gives you money as if their money is clean from gambling and tons of unions who don't even operate in this county. The difference about this initiative is whoever puts money into it, there is no quid pro quo that we can deliver. They get nothing. I can give them nothing. In every election that we undergo, look and see who gives money, and look and see what the quid pro quo is. And I'm going to get into dangerous waters here. Dangerous waters. It's the 8,000-pound gorilla that nobody wants to talk about in this state. But the machine that controls this state, that runs this state, that doesn't need to raise money, they just press a button. Yeah, the organized labor people, there's 12,000 of them here, and they can be on the commission, but if you are an independent businessman, you can't. There is, again, I say, no quid pro quo, but what we didn't want, and we discussed it among reason in government, what we wanted to do was to really separate the process of drawing lines from politics. And if politics in this district has been and will be likely in the, into the future about the power of unions, then we thought if you have 12 or 15,000 people who are affiliated with unions, and unions give DAS the money to run, then let's say take them out of it. That's the only thing. And whoever gives us money, if it's energy, if it's agriculture, if it's a philanthropy, whatever, again, I can't give them anything in return except the hope that we have an independent commission. But people in government can reward them. And that is something that we believe profoundly is at the heart of every issue that has caused Santa Barbara County to be plunged with tremendous homelessness and poverty, and has steered the greatest state in the history of America, the richest, into the most poverty. So what we really wanted to do, okay, I'll admit it, we wanted to try everything we could to let 5 citizens, boy, oh boy, 5 is tough, and they don't pass this test and that test, but it's always been 5 supervisors. And Dan can talk about there are metrics and math and science to make so people can go ahead and make a decision about a district. It's math and science and geography. It's not diversity, because diversity is, this is my feelings. This is about math and science, and I tell you, I know Salud Carbajal since he delivered coffee to Naomi, who I worked for. And if Salud can draw a district, I believe 5 members of our community can as well.
Thank you, Bob. So, Das, you had some comments?
Yeah. I mean, I think what's obvious here is that you have a profound mistrust of people who are members of unions, and this is one problem with Measure H. Measure H excludes you from the pool if you are a member of a union, even if you don't work for the county, but you are a member of a union that is represented by the county. So if you are a city, if you clean up city parks, you are excluded from the pool. If you clean up Isla Vista Parks, a whole nother district, you are excluded from the pool. You're fundamentally excluding an entire class of working people because you don't like their politics. And that's wrong. And I would argue probably unconstitutional. Now, I do believe, I started this whole process thinking, looking at the oil contributions and going, this is definitely a plot to usurp power. And Bob's protestations have permeated me enough to believe that's their interests may coincide, but that's not Bob's intention. I even just endorsed in a race one of the members of his group. So I obviously think there's some smarts and some talents over there. But there are some flaws. And one of the flaws is the illusion that you can take politics out of politics, right? Okay? That is a phrase, and populist movements try to do this all over the world and all over history, and all they ever do by trying to take politics out of politics is it is itself a political exercise. So by trying to take politics out of politics, Measure H creates a scenario under which there could be 2 Republicans, 2 Democrats, and 1 independent on the commission. What's the problem with that? That sounds fair, right? Except that there's just as many non-party preference folks and minor party preference folks as Republicans in this county. Why should they have less representation than Republicans? If there's twice as many Democrats, why should the Democrats have the same number of representatives as the Republicans? That means that fundamentally, if you have registered Democrat or independent, your voice is less than that of your neighbor who's registered Republican. And so Measure G simply acknowledges that's what the preferences of the community has been. And believe me, in this community, I don't control everyone with a D that's registered Democrat, just as oil interests don't control everyone with a R, but we can have a commission that's representative of the community that is still independent. And here's one more thing. Measure G prioritizes skills. The criteria of Measure G make sure that Professor Montello is more likely to be on that commission than I am. And I think that's a good thing. He's has more qualifications than I do. And under Measure G, someone with his skills would be prioritized in the pool. The only difference in terms of choosing the pool is they're not specific, and we're specific and says that the registrar of voters does the job. I don't know if folks know the history of the registrar of voters in this county. He was elected with Republican help against a Democrat that I supported and a lot of other people supported, and he's failed expectations on anyone's part to be partisan, right? And I think that's what we want, choosing the pool. I think there's, and I think my conclusion from all of this is that none of this needed to happen. What probably should have happened is a conversation, a very public conversation, and by the way, our initiative had 2 public hearings in which amendments could be made. Measure H had 2 public hearings under which no amendments could be made, right? So I would submit to you that we had more public dialogue that affected the product. But that my conclusion is that all of this is an unnecessary misunderstanding. Some folks that maybe are to the right of center fundamentally believed that we didn't want an independent redistricting commission, so why should we consult people on the left? And that we fundamentally believed these guys are out to get us, and this could have been taken care of by a public process, something where there was dialogue, compromise, and we probably could have come up with something even better than both of these. But that being said, I think Measure G has some features that are more spelled out, more constitutional, more independent, and more representative of the community. Vote yes on Measure G.
Thank you, Doss. So we have a little bit of time for questions, and I really want to get into this. This is the best part. So please, from the audience, we've defined the issue. Does anybody have any questions that we can respond to? Direct them to the panel at large or to a single member. Please.
So the better vote no on both?
Wait. We're going to give you a microphone. Oh, and we have one request. Hug the microphone. Pretend you're a singer in Bono's concert. It's the only way you'll be heard, because it turns out we need that for the audio track.
It sounds like it's better to vote no on both of them.
No, actually,
I could answer that. That's one strategy, because it's possible that we would get together and draft something else, and it also has enough time before the next census. But I think it's a little iffy of a strategy because we don't know what will happen. So I don't know that I would recommend that as the course
I'm going to
of
quote Daniel, who Dan a little earlier said either one would be an improvement on the present status. So let's go with that as what we all agree on.
I think that I agree with Mr. Montello. At least 7. What?
Mike, use the mic.
Okay. I agree with Mr. Montello that it at least should be 7. He tended to be more Measure H, but he said he would like 7 better than 5, and I totally agree with that. I think the bigger the community gets, the more representatives, the better, and you can see that in LA County. They have 5 county supervisors, and it's a mess. There are tons of little areas all over the city, Sunland, Tahunga, that just don't get attention. They can't manage it all. It's impossible. So that's not what they're doing, but I think the more people, the better. And so I would.
So you prefer the 11 to the 5?
Yeah,
generally.
yeah. I think it's.
Thank you for the comment.
And I think that I trust the government better to include all stakeholders. I mean, if you look at any committee in any government, here where I used to live, you had to have a member of each stakeholder in that project, and that was just a basic rule. You couldn't just, like, your neighbors could go, hey, I think this is a good idea, let's just go to the city and do this. They would go, well, that sounds like a good idea, but we're going to appoint this person and that person and that person and a whole bunch of people so that it's not just your little plan and agenda. And that's, I think that's the way I would go, is with Measure G.
Thank you very much. Over here? Was there a hand up over here? This gentleman?
Well, thank you. Bob has already outed me, and you know that I was one of the three persons involved in bringing forward Measure H. Quick comment and then a question. My comment would be, I think it's very, very telling that in the comments of both Doss and Mary, there seemed to be great trepidation about the idea of 5 ordinary citizens serving on this board and making decisions. A lot of references to experts and consultants and persons that have had great engagement in the county. I think our initiative was animated by the spirit that that's precisely what's wrong with the county, and that's what exactly we need are 5 ordinary citizens who are balanced in terms of partisanship making these decisions. That's comment number 1. Comment number 2, which leads to a question, is this. I don't know that it has been emphasized enough here, but I think it bears emphasis that under Measure G, the committee, which is comprised of 11 persons appointed through a whole series of filters that I'm going to argue can be manipulated by the county, can only act by supermajority. Can only act by a supermajority decision. And guess what? If they can't reach a supermajority, it defaults back to, surprise, the county. So it is circular. Under our initiative, H, it is, yes, 5 ordinary citizens acting by simple majority. So my question for Doss is, why are we so afraid of 5 ordinary citizens acting by majority vote?
May I correct that first before Doss speaks? If the supermajority is not reached, it does not devolve back to the Board of Supervisors. It goes to the courts, or it goes to the process that is set up by state law if they do not.
I didn't say it went back to the board. I said it went back to the county. It does go back to county officials.
Yeah, but
It goes to the
that's a
courts.
manipulative statement.
The courts are the state.
When you say it goes back to the county, what that is shorthand is going back to me, which is patently false. And no, really, you know that you know the county's the favorite bad guy of everybody. So just wage war against the county, and you don't have to actually have a dialogue here. Just tar and feather the county. It's an easy target. I have enormous faith in redistricting commissions and in citizens' participation. When the statewide redistricting law was passed, every bit of the Democratic Party statewide was opposed to it. The leadership of some of our local leaders, including myself, convinced the Ventura Democratic Party and the Santa Barbara local Democratic Party to be the pariahs in the state and supporting it.
Good for you.
And we were considered heretics because that was not where the majority party wanted to go. But we felt fundamentally that it is a principle that citizens should choose their legislators. I simply don't believe that every Republican in this county should have twice the representation of every Democrat and independent. And the initiative that you did, whether it is well-intentioned or whether you meant it this way, I'm not making a judgment on that because Bob's starting to persuade me he's a good guy. It creates a scenario under which, if you're a registered Republican, you have a greater voice per person than a Democrat or an independent. And I just think that's fundamentally wrong. That's a philosophical position, and I think a fair one.
It is a fair point, but it's also a fair point to say that under your initiative, the duplication of current proportionality would perpetuate the dominance of the Democratic Party. So don't stand on the high horse there.
I simply believe in one person, one vote. I think that's a pretty strong principle that this nation's founded on, and I feel pretty strongly about it.
Before we go off this, so just a quick question. So are you satisfied with your question's been dealt with in terms of the circularity? I'm interested in making sure that you feel that you've been responded to, and then we're going to go to Bob, that the reversion back to the county, because I'm not aware of this one yet, so.
You know, it's an observation. It does revert back to the county, and
Was it
our
the county or the
initiative
courts is what I'm asking?
is animated by the proposition that 5 ordinary citizens acting by simple majority can do the job.
Okay, no, but my question.
It is circular, so the
Yeah,
answer is that it is circular.
It's only circular in that it
If you take
corresponds.
the courts
it
are part of that
corresponds
circle
to
then.
state law, which ultimately your one has to too. Our one says particularly what the vote threshold that's necessary to reach is. Your one does not have a provision for a replacement in the case of an absence. So we don't even know if it takes 2 or 3 people on the commission proposed by H to pass.
Thank
We
you.
just specifically know what the number is for G and know what happens afterwards if that threshold is not
Thanks for
reached.
bringing up a question that clearly created some energy in the room. Appreciate it. Bob.
Okay. A number of things. I love the guy, but it's nonsense. It's political nonsense. This falling back on one person, one vote sounds great when you represent 2/3 of the county. You always have more votes. Number one. Number two, regardless of what Mary said, the money thing is always something that you follow that takes your eyes off the prize. There's nobody that controls anything. Nobody controls Dennis. Nobody controls me. Nobody controls Brian at all. And why can't? Citizens with experience like us, fathers and husbands, people who pay taxes and carry water in the community, have a point of view. Does everything have to go through a political machinery? Das never answered Dan Montello's single observation. Theirs can be gamed. Ours cannot. All right? That's as simple as it can be. Theirs can be gamed. The money thing, it's always that. Nick Welch called, I made the mistake of answering once. It was always that. Oh, their money is better? Stop it. I think that their provisions about letting people who are successful in business not be on the commission, I think theirs is unconstitutional as well. I think an argument can be made in this state and in this county particularly, where, yes, the Democratic machine with the power of public employee unions, public service employee unions, actually functions as a machine. Nobody wants to talk about it. Now, we didn't do this because we have an animosity toward people in the unions. I'm a member of a guild, have been for 35 years. But I think if you strip away all of this tribal nonsense, go back to what Dennis said. Why don't you say, as an example, we have a county that's gerrymandered. Look at it. Doesn't make sense. 5 people did that. Let's see. Go ahead. Vote for H. Let's see what happens in 2021. If you don't like it, you can change it. But here's an opportunity to see if 5 people in a scenario that cannot be gamed, whatever he says is great, but people make a decision about who should be on that committee. Can we control that? No. That's a subjective thing. Oh, you should be on and you should be on. And no. This is how politics are gamed. And if we had much more time, I think we could talk about data that proves a point either way. But
Thank you for that comment, because we are out of time. We're actually 5 minutes over time, but I don't want to cut it off too premature. Mary, you've been anxious to speak, and then I'm going to take one last question or comment out here in a minute.
I'd just like a final
And
comment.
Dan, you will get one too. Yes, absolutely.
Measure G, I mean, I will take exception that that Measure G excludes successful business people from the equation. It does not.
Yes, it does. Yes, it
only
does.
does
Yes.
if they are contributors to political campaigns that just
Mary,
like your others do. No,
Your
okay.
assumption is, ooh,
right,
big business is bad. Let's
No,
keep them
no,
out.
it's not.
Okay,
It's
let her speak, please,
political
Bob.
contributions from people.
Unions? That can be
That, okay.
hundreds of thousands.
Wait.
Measure
wait.
G
Please.
is based on the very successful State Redistricting Commission that has also been adopted by Los Angeles County and San Diego County. There is process, there is experience, there is a history that we can rely on with Measure G's process of selecting, of screening, and that is what the county's Measure G proposal is based on. That we know it's worked in the past, and there's every evidence it will work in the future. This is based on the work of the League of Women Voters in the state and across the country, is that you have a broad-based board or commission that is representative of the people in the community and that takes a supermajority to pass so that nobody is excluded and their voices are all heard. So that is why Measure G exists, and I think is the best measure, whoever is behind it.
This looks like it's turning out to be the summation, so I'm going to have to cut the last question. But Dan, please.
Well, I was just going to say, I thought faculty meetings were contentious. And I had one this afternoon. Wow, that's an education. Just two quick comments. You know, the number 5, the number 7, the number 11, and my endorsement of 7 notwithstanding, we shouldn't forget that 5 supervisors make all the tough, important decisions all the time. This is an important decision, but it's just one. So the capability of 5 people to do it should not be questioned. They are going to have some consultants and stuff like that. They're not doing it all by themselves in a room. Then the last point is simply, no, I understand you can't take politics out of politics, of course, but you work hard to create a process that balances it as much as possible. There are 2 grand, I mean, it's more complex than this, everyone knows that. But whether you call it red and blue or whatever, that have been around in human history for quite a while now. And to me, independent means that you balance those political philosophies. The Democrats who outnumber the Republicans in this county are still going to outnumber them no matter what the districts are. They're still going to have their influence. It's still going to be one person, one vote. But in the creation of the districts, the purpose of that, it seems to me, is to balance the influence of political persuasion so that you don't have partisan gerrymandering, which is the purpose of
But
this.
Professor, your work shows us that gerrymandering can overcome wherever partisan voters are, and that's why gerrymandering is bad. So you can't just say, oh, it'll be fine because Democrats will still be able to vote. When you've recut the lines, you're dictating the rules of the game.
Okay, just a quick response. If you have an equal number of Republicans and Democrats, then why do you assume the Republicans would control the process?
Well,
You have one independent, that could be anybody. It could be a green, or it could be a
Libertarian.
a Wallaceite, and you have potentially 2 Republicans and 2 Democrats. And yes, that's like if we drafted an initiative that diluted Republican representation, you guys would be screaming. So I
said I like 7 better than 5.
One person, one vote.
So here's...
Can I just also, we've heard a lot about the 5 members of the Board of Supervisors being 5 individuals and it only takes 3. Those 5 people are elected, which is very different than names that are being drawn out of a hat. They are representative of the people, and that is a big difference as well.
Yeah, I want to thank our panelists. Thank you very much for the vigor of this conversation. I want to go on record, although I think this topic can be thought to be dry, as I said at my outset. I certainly think it is vital. And I want to thank you for all proving I was wrong. It isn't even dry. I also want to quickly point out, I think that there is an implication that never got out. I thought it was going to come out earlier in the conversation. That has to do with where the line would get drawn vis-a-vis Isla Vista. You can all look into that on your own. I'm not sure where that cuts, like how the lines would be drawn vis-a-vis the student population versus the resident population. So these issues never came out tonight. There's some more there that are up for grabs. But what I think is really important is that you had a chance to hear 4 really articulate spokespeople of a proposal, which I think in any event is going to help us all. And I think gerrymandering is incredibly important as a question. And so anything we can do to improve redistricting, I'm glad you've been willing to come spend your evening with us doing it. I'm going to ask the panel if you could stick around, because I'm sure there's more questions. I see them in the back of the room. And let's have the conversation continue on. But we did say we'd end at 7. It's 7:12, and I'd like to honor that commitment for those of you who expected to leave at 7. So thank you very much for coming.
And where would this filming be shown again? If somebody wants
This film, Jeff, how long before this film will be on our website?
2 days.
How many?
2 days.
In 2 days, this will be on our website, and please refer people to it, because I can't think of 4 more. I got to tell you, I'm so grateful. When I called Bob, I was afraid that we wouldn't get a really vigorous conversation. I was more concerned about that than anything else, and this really was what I was hoping to get. So thank you, panelists.